An earnings-based valuation is based upon maintainable earnings or cash flows, and maintainable earnings are earnings which have any extraordinary items or special events or anything like that stripped out of them to give a core basis of earnings. Now, there's two key approaches here. One is to apply a multiple to that. So you'd work out a calculation of maintainable earnings based upon historical information or projections, whichever, and multiply it by what appears to be a suitable number. The other approach to use in an earnings valuation, and the one that's the most popular, is a discounted cash flow approach. What you would do there is to work out an earnings projection or a cash flow projection, and then use a discount factor, which in practice tends to be based upon the weighted average cost of capital. In other words, the weighted average of the cost of capital, i.e. share capital, loans, etc., and the rate of interest or dividend paid on those on a weighted average basis. Use that as a discount factor, apply that to a profit projection and work out a value based on that. However, these things are highly subjective and prone to query. And there is a court case involved in this, which we can use as an example, and it's a famous case called H versus H. It's a divorce case. In the H versus H case, they were selling a chain of restaurants, and husband and wife were both claiming their share of the value of these restaurants. So the wife had put in a value, fairly high earnings, maintainable earnings, multiplied by a fairly high multiple. The wife was saying it's worth this much. And the husband obviously went for a much lower level of maintainable earnings and a much lower multiple. And the point of that is that both of these sides were justified by forensic accountants, presumably paid large amounts of money to come up with these values. The judge in the case, however, looked at both of them and went, don't necessarily agree with this, and applied his own estimates. Quite how His Honour arrived at these figures, we're not quite sure. The point of the story, though, is that we ended up with three different calculations, all of which were backed up by forensic accountants and experts who all thought that their valuation was suitable. Slightly biased on each side, of course, but bias is something which is intrinsic to the whole process of valuation. So the key point about it is, if you're going for a valuation on an earnings basis, you've got to be able to justify it, and you've got to be able to back it up with reasonable assumptions and estimates.